Welcome. As you settle in, preparing for rest, let us journey together, drifting back through time to a period of remarkable intellectual flourishing and profound historical consequence. Tonight, our focus is the Abbasid Caliphate, a dynasty that ruled for 5 centuries and whose legacy continues to resonate across the world. For 500 years, from 750 to 1258 CE, the Abbasids presided over a vast empire, a golden age of science, culture, and learning that shaped the course of human history. They were not merely rulers, but patrons of knowledge, fostering an environment where scholars from different cultures and faiths converged to translate, innovate, and create. The story of the Abbasids begins not with triumph, but with a quiet, simmering dissatisfaction. The preceding Umayyad Caliphate, based in Damascus, had grown detached and aristocratic, favoring Arab elites over the Mawali, non-Arab converts to Islam. This created a deep well of resentment, particularly in the eastern reaches of the empire, in a region known as Khorasan. Here, a revolution was brewing, led by a charismatic general named Abu Muslim, who championed the cause of the Abbasid family, descendants of al-Abbas, an uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. This was a clever and potent claim, aligning the revolution with the revered family of the Prophet, offering a promise of a more just and pious rule. The revolution, with its black banners symbolizing the family of the Prophet, swept across the empire with astonishing speed and force. The Umayyad armies were defeated, the last Umayyad caliph was hunted down and killed, and the Abbasids seized control. The new caliph, Abu al-Abbas, established his rule, and with a ruthless efficiency that earned him the nickname Az-Safa, the bloodshedder, he consolidated his power. But the true turning point, the moment that would define the dynasty for centuries to come, was the decision of his successor, al-Mansur, to move the capital. He chose a new location on the banks of the Tigris River, an old Persian village named Baghdad. With an almost mystical sense of purpose, al-Mansur oversaw the construction of a city that would become the heart of the world. Built in a perfectly circular design, Baghdad was not just a political capital. It was a symbol of the new dynasty's ambition and its cosmopolitan nature. It was a city of scholars, merchants, and artists, a crossroads where ideas from Greece, Persia, and China would meet and merge. The move from Damascus to Baghdad signified a fundamental shift. The Arab-centric empire of the Umayyads was replaced by a new, more inclusive Islamic civilization, deeply influenced by Persian culture and a universalist vision. We will explore the early years of the Caliphate, tracing the cunning and strength of its first caliphs. We will then immerse ourselves in the legendary splendor of the Golden Age, a time of unparalleled scientific and cultural achievement under figures like Harun al-Rashid and his son, al-Mamun. Imagine the House of Wisdom, a magnificent library and academy where scholars translated ancient texts and made groundbreaking discoveries in mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. This was a world of bustling souks filled with exotic goods, of magnificent palaces, and of quiet courtyards where philosophers debated the nature of existence. But history is a cycle of ascent and descent, and the Abbasid story is no exception. We will witness the slow unraveling of central power, the rise of powerful regional dynasties, and the growing influence of military commanders, who in many ways became the true power behind the caliphs. We will observe the empire's fragmentation and the complex political landscape that emerged, where caliphs often became mere figureheads, their spiritual authority a relic of a glorious past. Finally, we will arrive at the dramatic and tragic conclusion of the Abbasid story with the arrival of the Mongol armies. The sacking of Baghdad in 1258, a cataclysmic event, marked the end of the Caliphate as a political entity and, in the eyes of many, the end of the Islamic Golden Age. But even in its end, the Abbasid legacy endured, its intellectual and cultural achievements serving as a foundation for future civilizations and a testament to the power of knowledge and inquiry. As you listen, allow these stories to paint a picture in your mind, a tapestry woven with threads of power, faith, and knowledge. Let the whispers of scholars in the House of Wisdom and the echoes of merchants in the souks of Baghdad carry you into a peaceful state. The history of the Abbasid Caliphate is a journey of ambition and intellect, a reminder that even in the most distant past, the pursuit of understanding shines as a guiding light. Now, close your eyes and let us begin our journey to the heart of a civilization that changed the world. As the Umayyad Caliphate's power began to wane in the 8th century, a sense of deep dissatisfaction took root across the empire, particularly in its eastern provinces. This discontent wasn't a sudden storm, but a slow-building pressure, a consequence of the Umayyad rulers' policies. The Umayyads, based in Damascus, had established a social hierarchy that placed Arab Muslims at the top, a privileged class that dominated the military and administration. Below them were the Mawali, the non-Arab converts to Islam. Though they embraced the new faith, they were often treated as second-class citizens, subjected to higher taxes and social discrimination. This created a fertile ground for dissent, a shared grievance that spanned diverse peoples from Persia to Central Asia. The Umayyads' lavish lifestyles and perceived deviation from the pious principles of early Islam further fueled the fire of their critics. Into this atmosphere of unrest stepped the Abbasid family, a powerful and politically astute clan descended from al-Abbas, an uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. Their claim to power was rooted in this lineage, which they used to great effect. They positioned themselves not just as an alternative to the Umayyads, but as the rightful heirs to the Caliphate, promising a return to a more just and equitable Islamic state. They adopted the black banner, a symbol associated with the Prophet's family, and their revolutionary movement, known as the Hashimiyya, spread its message in secret, recruiting followers and building a powerful network. The center of this clandestine activity was Khorasan, a vast and culturally rich province in what is now eastern Iran and parts of Central Asia. Here, the local population, a mix of Arabs and Persians, had long felt marginalized by Damascus. The revolution's great general was Abu Muslim. A figure shrouded in both historical fact and legend, he was a brilliant military strategist and a charismatic leader who rallied thousands to the Abbasid cause. His army, a coalition of disgruntled Arabs, Mawali, and other groups, was disciplined and motivated by a shared sense of injustice. They marched west, sweeping through Umayyad territories, their black banners a stark contrast to the white flags of their rivals. The Umayyad armies, complacent and weakened by internal strife, were ill-prepared for this onslaught. The final, decisive battle took place on the banks of the Zab River in 750 CE. The Umayyad forces were decisively defeated, and the last Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, was hunted down and killed. With the Umayyads overthrown, the Abbasids' first caliph, Abu al-Abbas, known as Az-Safa or the Bloodshedder, began the brutal task of consolidating power. This was a ruthless and necessary step for a new dynasty. He and his family systematically eliminated the remaining Umayyad princes and their supporters to prevent any future challenges to their rule. This act of cold, calculated violence, while seemingly harsh, was seen by many as the necessary purging of a corrupt old order. It cemented the Abbasid family's control and marked a definitive break with the past. The stage was now set for the next great chapter of Islamic civilization, one that would move its heart away from Syria and toward the cultural crossroads of Mesopotamia and Persia. This shift was more than just a change in leadership. It was a profound reorientation of the empire's identity. The Abbasids, with their Persian-influenced worldview and their reliance on non-Arab converts, would forge a new kind of Islamic society. The Arab-centric, clan-based system of the Umayyads would be replaced by a meritocratic bureaucracy staffed by diverse scholars, administrators, and military commanders. The black banners of the revolution had signaled a new dawn, one that promised a more inclusive empire, but also a more centralized and powerful one, guided by the twin pillars of piety and political cunning. The fall of the Umayyads was not an ending, but a powerful beginning, a historical pivot that would usher in an age of unprecedented intellectual and cultural dynamism. Having secured their hold on power, the Abbasids embarked on a course that would fundamentally redefine their empire. The first great decision, a move of both political pragmatism and grand vision, was to establish a new capital. The second caliph, al-Mansur, was not content with the Umayyad city of Damascus, which was too deeply associated with the old regime. He sought a new center of power that would symbolize the Abbasid shift away from an Arab-centric identity toward a more inclusive, Persian-influenced one. His gaze fell upon a small village on the banks of the Tigris River, an ideal location due to its strategic position at the crossroads of trade routes linking the Mediterranean to the east. This place was called Baghdad. In 762 CE, al-Mansur initiated the construction of a city that was a marvel of urban planning and a testament to Abbasid ambition. Designed by engineers, architects, and surveyors from across the empire, the city was built in a perfectly circular shape. This unique layout was both symbolic and practical. The circular design, with its four main gates, Khorasan Gate to the northeast, Basra Gate to the southeast, Kufa Gate to the southwest, and Syria Gate to the northwest, represented a perfect enclosed world with the Caliph at its very heart. It was a visual representation of the Caliph's position as the spiritual and temporal center of the empire. At the core of the city lay the Caliph's palace, known as the Golden Gate Palace, and the Great Mosque, both massive structures designed to inspire awe and reverence. The city's construction was a colossal undertaking, involving thousands of laborers, artisans, and engineers. The project took 4 years to complete, a testament to the organizational prowess of the new dynasty. The city itself was a fortress protected by two concentric walls, a deep moat, and the formidable Tigris River. The space between the inner and outer walls housed a thriving residential area, while the Caliph and his court occupied the central circular core, a sanctuary of power and privilege. The markets and commercial districts were situated outside the city walls, creating a buffer zone and ensuring that the inner city remained a tranquil seat of government and religion, free from the noise and chaos of commerce. Baghdad, which means gift of God in Persian, quickly grew into a bustling metropolis, a magnet for scholars, merchants, and adventurers from across the known world. Its location on the Tigris provided easy access to trade routes by water, and it soon became the wealthiest city in the world. The shift of the capital from Damascus to Baghdad marked a profound cultural transformation. The Abbasid court adopted Persian administrative and ceremonial practices, and Persian became the language of high culture and intellectual discourse. The Persian custom of veiling women, for instance, became widespread in the court. The Caliphs, while still the spiritual leaders of the Muslim world, were now seen as divine-like rulers, presiding over a highly structured and centralized state. The move also signaled the Abbasids' deliberate effort to bridge the cultural gap between the Arab and Persian populations. By embracing Persian customs and integrating Persian administrators and scholars into the highest echelons of government, the Caliphate fostered a new, inclusive identity that celebrated the diversity of its subjects. This cosmopolitan spirit was a defining feature of the Abbasid era. The city of Baghdad, a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas, became the beating heart of this new civilization. Its markets were filled with goods from China, India, and Africa, and its libraries were a repository of knowledge from Greece, Persia, and beyond. This circular city on the Tigris was more than just a capital. It was the cradle of a golden age, a place where the seeds of knowledge, commerce, and culture would blossom and flourish. As the new capital of Baghdad flourished, the Abbasid Caliphate entered what historians now refer to as its Golden Age, a period of remarkable cultural and intellectual efflorescence. This era reached its zenith under the reign of the legendary Caliph Harun al-Rashid, who ruled from 786 to 809 CE. His name is synonymous with the splendors of the 1001 Nights, a collection of tales that, though fictional, captures the spirit of his magnificent court and the city he ruled. Harun al-Rashid's reign was not just one of opulence, however. It was a time of unprecedented stability, economic prosperity, and intellectual curiosity. His court was a dazzling hub of poets, musicians, scholars, and scientists, drawn from all corners of the empire and beyond. Harun al-Rashid was a patron of the arts and sciences, a man who understood that a great empire was built not just on military might, but on the foundation of knowledge. He actively encouraged the translation of ancient texts from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic, a process that would become one of the defining features of the Golden Age. He funded expeditions to acquire rare manuscripts and established libraries to house them. It was during this period that the intellectual currents of the ancient world, the philosophies of Aristotle, the mathematics of Euclid, and the medicine of Galen, were rediscovered, preserved, and built upon by Muslim scholars. This was a critical moment in history, a bridge between classical antiquity and the European Renaissance, and it began with the visionary leadership of men like Harun al-Rashid. The Caliph's personal life was also a source of great historical interest. His wife, the influential Queen Zubaydah, was a powerful figure in her own right. She was known for her lavish patronage of public works, most famously financing the construction of a series of wells and way stations along the pilgrimage route to Mecca, a project that became known as the Darb Zubaydah, or Zubaydah's Way. This was more than a gesture of piety. It was a demonstration of a queen's power and influence, a testament to the role of women in the Abbasid court. The Caliph's close relationship with his Grand Vizier, the Barmakid family, a powerful Persian dynasty, was also a cornerstone of his reign. The Barmakids were brilliant administrators who helped centralize the government and manage the empire's vast wealth. Their rise and subsequent sudden fall from grace, a dramatic event in 803 CE, remains one of the great mysteries of the period, a stark reminder of the volatile nature of court politics. Under Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Caliphate was at the pinnacle of its power and prestige. The empire stretched from North Africa to the borders of China, and its diplomatic relations extended as far as Charlemagne's Carolingian Empire in Europe, an exchange that resulted in the famous gift of an elephant named Abu Abbas. This was a world of global connections, where ideas, goods, and people flowed freely. The prosperity of the era was visible in the bustling markets of Baghdad, where silk from China, spices from India, and furs from Scandinavia were traded. The Caliph's court was the epicenter of this prosperity, a place of refined culture, magnificent architecture, and intellectual fervor. Harun al-Rashid's reign concluded with the inevitable succession dispute between his two sons, al-Amin and al-Mamun, but his legacy of cultural patronage and intellectual curiosity would live on, setting the stage for the next great phase of the Golden Age. His vision had transformed Baghdad into a city of unparalleled learning, a beacon for scholars everywhere. As you drift to sleep, imagine the whispered verses of poets in the Caliph's court, the clatter of artisans in the bustling souks, and the quiet reverence of scholars poring over ancient texts under the lamplight. This was the vibrant and complex world of Harun al-Rashid, a world on the cusp of even greater intellectual achievement. Following the reign of Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Golden Age reached its intellectual zenith under his son, al-Mamun, who became caliph in 813 CE. Al-Mamun's era is perhaps best remembered for the institutionalization of scholarship and the establishment of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. This was more than just a library. It was a grand academy, a center of learning that attracted the greatest minds of the age, regardless of their faith or origin. Scholars from all corners of the empire, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, converged here to translate, study, and create. Al-Mamun's deep personal interest in philosophy and science fueled this endeavor. He would often host debates and discussions in his palace, personally engaging with scholars on topics ranging from theology to astronomy. The House of Wisdom was the engine of a massive translation movement. Teams of scholars working tirelessly translated thousands of texts from Greek, Syriac, Persian, and Indian languages into Arabic. They sought out rare manuscripts of Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, mathematicians like Euclid and Archimedes, and physicians like Galen. This wasn't a simple word-for-word translation. It was a painstaking process of intellectual transfer. The translators, often highly paid, meticulously corrected and improved the texts, ensuring their accuracy and clarity. This monumental effort preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, which had been lost to much of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. The impact of this work was profound and far-reaching. By making these ancient works accessible, the Abbasids provided their own scholars with a rich intellectual foundation upon which to build. They didn't merely replicate the knowledge of the past, they expanded it. In mathematics, scholars like al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, a term derived from his book Al-Jabr, and introduced Arabic numerals, which originated in India, to the Islamic world and eventually to Europe. In medicine, Al-Razi meticulously documented diseases and their treatments, and Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine, a comprehensive medical encyclopedia that was used as a standard textbook for centuries. In astronomy, they refined the astrolabe, built observatories, and corrected the work of the ancient Greeks, making more accurate measurements of the cosmos. The House of Wisdom was a symbol of the Caliphate's cosmopolitan nature and its commitment to knowledge. It was a place where different intellectual traditions met and merged, giving rise to new fields of inquiry and innovation. This period saw the flourishing of Baghdad's paper industry, a technology learned from the Chinese. The availability of paper, a cheaper alternative to parchment, made the copying and dissemination of knowledge far more efficient, a key factor in the intellectual boom. Imagine the bustling scriptoriums, the quiet rustle of paper, and the scent of ink, as scribes painstakingly copied manuscripts under the watchful eyes of librarians. Al-Mamun's rule was a high point of Abbasid intellectual life, but it also saw the seeds of future instability. The Caliphs' embrace of a rationalist theological school, the Mu'tazilism, created friction with more traditional religious scholars. This theological debate, while intellectually stimulating, also deepened divisions within the empire. Despite these tensions, the legacy of Al-Mamun and the House of Wisdom remains one of the most significant chapters in the history of science and human inquiry. It was a golden age of intellectual freedom and patronage, a time when the pursuit of knowledge was considered one of the noblest of human endeavors. As we drift through the centuries, the brilliant light of the Abbasid Golden Age begins to dim, not in a sudden cataclysm, but through a slow and gradual fragmentation of power. By the 10th century, the central authority of the Caliphs in Baghdad was noticeably weakening. While the Abbasids retained their spiritual prestige and were still the nominal heads of the Islamic world, their political and military control over the vast empire was eroding. This decline was a complex process, driven by a combination of internal strife, financial difficulties, and the rise of powerful regional dynasties. The vast size of the Caliphate, stretching from North Africa to Central Asia, made it increasingly difficult to govern from a single city. Governors, once loyal representatives of the Caliph, began to assert their independence, establishing their own hereditary dynasties. One of the first and most significant of these breakaway states was the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba in Spain, established by a surviving Umayyad prince. But closer to the heart of the empire, in the eastern provinces, other dynasties emerged. The Samanids and the Ghaznavids in Persia and Central Asia became powerful military forces, controlling lucrative trade routes and acting as patrons of their own courts. In Egypt, the Fatimids, a rival caliphate claiming descent from the prophet's daughter Fatima, rose to power in the 10th century. Their presence created a deep ideological and political schism within the Islamic world, challenging the Abbasids' spiritual authority and controlling the strategically vital trade routes of the Mediterranean. The Caliphs in Baghdad, faced with these centrifugal forces, found themselves in a precarious position. Their armies, once a source of strength, were now increasingly composed of foreign mercenaries, primarily Turkish slave soldiers known as Mamluks. These Mamluks were highly skilled and disciplined warriors, but their loyalty was to their commanders and to their own corporate interests, not to the Caliphate itself. As the central government's ability to pay its troops dwindled, the military commanders grew in power, often dictating policy and even installing or deposing caliphs at will. The caliphs became, in many respects, puppets, with real power residing in the hands of these military strongmen. The once mighty ruler in the Golden Gate Palace was now a mere figurehead, his influence confined to the ceremonial and religious aspects of his office. The economic foundations of the Caliphate were also crumbling. The cost of maintaining a vast bureaucracy and an expensive military was immense. And as the regional dynasties ceased sending taxes to Baghdad, the central treasury suffered. The great public works and lavish patronage of the arts and sciences, which had defined the Golden Age, became less frequent. While centers of learning still thrived, the focus of intellectual and cultural life began to shift to the courts of the regional rulers, who sought to legitimize their rule by emulating the splendor of old Baghdad. This period of fragmentation was not a total collapse, but a transformation. The Caliphate was no longer a single unified empire, but a collection of independent or semi-independent states, all of which still looked to Baghdad as the spiritual center of Islam. The Caliph, even in his diminished state, was the ultimate religious authority, the source of legitimacy for other rulers. This spiritual power, was his last remaining asset, a symbolic connection to the Prophet that no other dynasty could claim. As the political map of the Islamic world became more complex, the Abbasid Caliphate became a living anachronism, a once mighty empire now a shadow of its former self, slowly drifting toward an uncertain future. As the Abbasid Caliphate's central authority fractured, a new and powerful force was emerging on its eastern frontiers, the Seljuk Turks. These nomadic warriors from Central Asia were originally recruited as mercenaries for the various regional dynasties, but they soon began to carve out their own empire. In 1055, a pivotal moment in Islamic history occurred when the Seljuk leader Tugril Beg marched into Baghdad. The Caliph, a figure of spiritual authority, but with no real military power, welcomed Tugril Beg, who had promised to restore order and protect the Sunni Caliphate from its Shia rivals, particularly the Fatimids. This moment marked the beginning of a new phase for the Abbasid Caliphs. They were no longer the absolute rulers of a vast empire, but instead became symbolic heads, while the real political and military power lay with the Seljuk sultans. The sultan, whose title meant power or authority, was now the effective ruler, a military strongman who acted as the caliph's protector. The caliph retained his religious prestige, the right to have his name mentioned in the Friday sermon and on coins, and the ultimate spiritual legitimacy that other rulers craved. This unique dual leadership system, where the sultan held the sword and the caliph held the spiritual mantle, defined the next 2 centuries of the caliphate. The Seljuks, who were staunchly Sunni, did indeed bring a measure of stability to the region. They defeated the Fatimids in Syria and Palestine, reasserted Sunni dominance, and created a vast and unified empire that stretched from Central Asia to Anatolia. This new political reality had profound consequences for the Abbasids. The Caliphs, while stripped of their political power, were now secure under Seljuk protection. The splendor of the court might have been diminished, but the institution of the Caliphate itself was preserved. This period also saw the flourishing of a new wave of intellectual and cultural activity, often centered in the Seljuk courts. The great Persian polymath Omar Khayyam and the influential philosopher and theologian al-Ghazali lived and worked during this time, their genius often supported by Seljuk patronage. This era was also shaped by external pressures, most notably the Crusades. Beginning in 1095, European Christian armies marched into the Levant, seeking to capture the Holy Land. The Seljuks, who controlled the region, were the primary defenders against these incursions. The Crusades, while having a direct impact on the Seljuk territories, had a more indirect effect on Baghdad. They preoccupied the Seljuk military, often drawing their focus away from internal matters, and highlighted the fragmented nature of the Islamic world, which was unable to mount a unified defense against the invaders. While the caliph in Baghdad held a position of religious authority, he had no army to command, and his calls for a unified jihad were largely ignored by the self-interested regional rulers. The relationship between the Abbasid caliphs and their Seljuk protectors was a complex one, a delicate balance of power and symbolism. For the caliphs, it was an existence of gilded cages where their survival was guaranteed, but their power was a memory. For the Seljuks, the caliph was a vital source of legitimacy, his blessing a divine sanction for their rule. This symbiotic relationship, born of necessity and maintained by political reality, would last for over a century, a period that showcased the resilience of the caliphate as an institution, even as its political power steadily eroded. Following the period of Seljuk dominance, the Abbasid Caliphate experienced a brief but significant resurgence of direct political power, a period often overlooked but critical to understanding its final days. By the 12th century, the Seljuk Empire, weakened by internal conflicts and succession disputes, began to fracture. This provided a window of opportunity for the Abbasid caliphs to reassert their authority, not over the entire Islamic world, but over the immediate surroundings of Baghdad and Mesopotamia. This period is most notably associated with Caliph al-Nasir, who reigned from 1180 to 1225 CE, an era of calculated political maneuvering and a revival of Abbasid might. Al-Nasir was a remarkably cunning and ambitious ruler. He understood that the days of a vast, centralized caliphate were over. but he was determined to transform the Abbasid office from a ceremonial role back into one of genuine political power. He did this by playing the various regional dynasties against each other. He allied with the Khwarezmian Empire, a new power emerging in Central Asia, against the remaining Seljuk rulers. He also skillfully used his spiritual authority, which had never diminished, to rally support and legitimize his military campaigns. Under his rule, the Abbasid Caliphate once again controlled a respectable territory, with its own army and a flourishing court life, though on a much smaller scale than in its golden age. This newfound independence, however, was fragile and came with a high price. In his efforts to secure his own position, al-Nasir had inadvertently created a new and more formidable enemy, the Khwarezmian Empire. The Khwarezm Shah, the ruler of this powerful state, was a formidable military leader who had ambitions of his own, including replacing the Abbasids as the spiritual head of the Sunni world. The Caliphate found itself in a dangerous new geopolitical landscape, caught between ambitious regional powers and a looming external threat. The Crusades continued to be a factor, but the attention of the Islamic world had largely shifted eastward, where the true powers of the day were now located. Al-Nasir's reign represented a final, brilliant flash of Abbasid political life. He was a master of diplomacy and intrigue, a ruler who successfully navigated a complex web of alliances and rivalries to restore a semblance of direct rule. He revived public works in Baghdad, patronized religious scholars, and even attempted to unify various Islamic chivalric orders, a move designed to consolidate his spiritual and temporal authority. His long reign provided a much-needed period of stability and self-rule for the Caliphate, but it also placed it on a collision course with a new and terrifying force that was about to erupt from the steppes of Central Asia. The political reality was that Baghdad was no longer the undisputed center of the world, but simply one power among many, and a vulnerable one at that. The stage was set for the final tragic chapter of the Abbasid story. Al-Nasir had, in his quest for power, created a situation where the Caliphate, now once again a political entity with its own army and territorial claims, was a target. The centuries of political decline and military dependence on others had left the core of the Caliphate weak, and no amount of clever diplomacy could truly prepare it for the storm that was coming. The tranquility of the 13th century in the Islamic world was shattered by a force of unimaginable power and ferocity: the Mongols. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, these nomadic warriors from the steppes of Central Asia had forged a vast empire through ruthless conquest. By the 1250s, the Mongol armies, led by Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, had turned their attention westward, toward the heart of the Islamic world. The Abbasid Caliphate, despite its recent resurgence under al-Nasir, was ill-prepared for this onslaught. The Caliphate's army, though a symbol of its renewed political power, was a fraction of the size and ferocity of the Mongol war machine. In 1257, Hulagu Khan sent an ultimatum to the reigning caliph, al-Mustasim. The Mongols demanded the caliph's complete submission, the dismantling of Baghdad's defensive walls, and the surrender of the city. Al-Mustasim, perhaps in a state of delusion regarding his own power or due to the misguided advice of his vizier, refused. His response was a mix of defiance and overconfidence, a fatal miscalculation that sealed the fate of his dynasty and the city of Baghdad. The caliph, who had never faced a serious military threat in his life, failed to grasp the scale of the danger he was facing. In January 1258, the Mongol armies laid siege to Baghdad. The city, once the jewel of the world, was surrounded by a force of tens of thousands of warriors. The siege was swift and brutal. The Caliphate's army was no match for the disciplined and highly effective Mongol siege warfare. Within a matter of days, the outer walls were breached. Al-Mustasim, finally realizing the hopelessness of his situation, attempted to negotiate, but it was too late. He, along with his court and a few thousand citizens, surrendered to Hulagu Khan. What followed was one of the most devastating events in the history of the Middle East. For weeks, the Mongols sacked the city. The libraries, including the legendary House of Wisdom, were destroyed, their countless books thrown into the Tigris River until, as the legend goes, the river's waters ran black with ink. Mosques, palaces, and public baths were razed to the ground. The city's population was slaughtered in a brutal massacre. Estimates of the death toll vary, but it is believed to be in the hundreds of thousands. The scale of the destruction was immense, and the psychological impact on the Islamic world was profound. The city that had been the center of learning, commerce, and culture for 5 centuries was reduced to a smoking ruin. The end of the Caliphate was particularly gruesome. Hulagu Khan, in a macabre twist, ordered al-Mustasim to be executed. According to various accounts, the caliph was either rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses or starved to death. His death in February 1258 marked the official end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a political entity. The Mongols then massacred the rest of the Abbasid family, ensuring there would be no dynastic heir to claim the throne. The fall of Baghdad and the end of the Caliphate was a turning point, a traumatic event that, in the eyes of many, brought the Islamic Golden Age to a close. The sacking of Baghdad in 1258 and the death of the last Abbasid caliph marked the end of an era, but not the end of the Abbasid legacy. Though the political institution was gone, the intellectual and cultural achievements of the Caliphate were far too profound to be erased by fire and sword. The intellectual foundations of the Islamic Golden Age, algebra, optics, medicine, and astronomy, had already spread across the world, carried by scholars and merchants long before the Mongol invasion. Many of these ideas, translated and studied, would find their way into Europe through Spain and Sicily, playing a critical role in the intellectual awakening that would lead to the European Renaissance. In the aftermath of the disaster, a new Abbasid Caliphate was established in Cairo under the patronage of the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. The Mamluks, who had defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, saw the immense value in preserving the spiritual authority of the Caliphate. While these shadow caliphs in Cairo held no real political or military power, their presence provided a crucial source of legitimacy for the Mamluk sultans and, later, for the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the caliph in Cairo served as a ceremonial head of Sunni Islam, his blessing sought by rulers seeking to cement their authority. This symbolic continuation of the caliphate highlights the enduring importance of the Abbasid name and lineage as a source of religious and political legitimacy. Beyond the political and religious spheres, the Abbasid legacy is etched into the very fabric of Islamic civilization. The Persian cultural influence, which the Abbasids had so eagerly embraced, became a defining characteristic of Islamic high culture, shaping everything from poetry and literature to art and architecture. The administrative systems and bureaucratic structures developed in Baghdad were adopted and adapted by subsequent empires. The patronage of science and learning, a hallmark of the Golden Age, became an aspirational model for future rulers. Cities like Cairo, Isfahan, and Istanbul, which rose to prominence after the fall of Baghdad, became new centers of learning and art, building on the intellectual traditions established by the Abbasids. The Abbasid Caliphate's greatest contribution was arguably the creation of a truly universal and cosmopolitan Islamic civilization. By welcoming scholars, artists, and administrators from all corners of their vast empire and beyond, they fostered an environment where the knowledge of the ancient world was not just preserved, but expanded and enriched. This intellectual heritage, with its emphasis on reason, inquiry, and scholarship, continues to inspire. The stories of the caliphs, the poets, the scientists, and the mystics of this era remind us of a time when Baghdad was the undisputed center of the world, a city of unparalleled brilliance. As we conclude our journey through the history of the Abbasid caliphs, let us remember that the end of their political rule was not the end of their story. Their legacy lives on in the pages of countless books, in the intricate patterns of Islamic art, and in the very foundations of scientific thought. The echoes of their golden age still resonate through the centuries, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the timeless allure of a civilization that, for 500 years, guided the world. Sweet dreams.